Warriors just made their trade intentions impossible to miss. And it's not a vague rumor anymore. Mike Dunleavy Jr. basically spelled it out. Golden State has been linked to Pelicans wing Trey Murphy III since the preseason. Last week, it was reported the Warriors would be willing to give up multiple first-round picks for him. On Tuesday, Mike Dunleavy Jr. addressed what kind of player would justify sacrificing future picks beyond the Stephen Curry era. And his answer made the Warriors' obvious target even clearer. Dunleavy was asked what type of player the Warriors would need in return to justify giving up future draft picks. Specifically, picks that would land when Steph Curry is no longer there. He didn't name a player, but he described the profile. I think if we're talking about draft picks that will be made when Steph is no longer here, it's going to have to be a player that we believe we can get in return that will be here when those picks are made. That player is going to have to be very impactful. That quote tells you how Golden State is thinking. Not just about the next month, but about the years after Curry. Because if the Warriors are willing to spend picks from the post-Curry era, the return can't be a short-term fix. It has to be a younger piece that keeps the franchise competitive later. The article says the Warriors' interest in Trey Murphy III apparently remains, and it adds that Dunleavy's comments made the interest very clear. Last week, the report said the Warriors would give up multiple first-round picks for Murphy. And the article says that could still be true even after the devastating knee injury that ended Jimmy Butler's season. So even with a major setback, the trade chase hasn't disappeared. It may have actually sharpened. This isn't just Warriors like Murphy. It's what the Warriors are willing to risk to get him. Dunleavy's logic is simple. If you trade away picks that happen after Curry is gone, you need a player who will still be there when those picks convey. Not a rental, not a quick patch. A player who will be impactful and still on the roster in that future window. And according to the article, that description fits Murphy perfectly. You might be thinking, is there really anyone who fits that description cleanly? The article says yes, and it points straight to Murphy. He's 25 years old, and the article says he's on a team-friendly contract for the next 3 years. Those details match the Warriors' logic. Competitive now, and still part of the plan later. The article says, unless there's a miracle trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo, Murphy might be the only rumored trade target the Warriors would give up their draft picks for. That suggests the internal bar is extremely high. The numbers make it easier to understand why. Murphy is averaging 22.2 points, 6.1 rebounds, 3.6 assists, and 1.5 steals this season. He's also shooting 49.7% from the field and 38.7% from three. That's real production. In an ideal world, the article says the Warriors would add Murphy to a core of Stephen Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green. That's the win-now vision. But the article also says Murphy could keep the team competitive in the short term and allow them to be dangerous again when Butler returns next season. That's value across timelines. Quick reset. Dunleavy said if the Warriors trade away post-Curry draft picks, the return must be a player who will still be there when those picks are made and be very impactful. The article says that profile fits Trey Murphy III, who Golden State has been linked to since the preseason. Now here's the catch. The article says there's no indication a deal is imminent, and it adds that reports suggest the Pelicans are holding on to Murphy. So this isn't just about Golden State's willingness to pay. It's also about New Orleans refusing to move an ascending star. So let me ask you this. If you're the Warriors, do you push even harder for the obvious target? Or do you step back because the Pelicans are reportedly holding firm? The article does mention another player who could fit the same idea. It says Lauri Markkanen is 28, young enough, and back on the radar after Golden State pursued a trade hard in the 2024 offseason. But the difference is money. The article says Markkanen makes more than $20 million more than Murphy, and because of that, the Warriors might have to trade Butler in the process. The article adds that this would require even more assets to incentivize the Jazz to take on Butler's $56.7 million contract for next season. That's why the article frames Murphy as the main target, cleaner fit and less complicated financially. The article says Murphy probably remains the top target unless something bombshell happens involving Antetokounmpo, but it also says that scenario seems unlikely to happen before next month's deadline. So what's next is straightforward. Golden State's interest in Murphy remains, and Dunleavy's comments explain why. He fits the profile of a younger, very impactful player who could still be there when post-Curry picks would convey. But the article says the Pelicans appear to be holding on to him, and there's no sign a deal is close. Murphy stays the obvious target, and the alternatives are either unlikely or far more complicated, and that obvious target label matters because it shows focus. It suggests Golden State isn't browsing the market. They're circling one profile. A 25-year-old on a team-friendly deal for the next 3 years fits the exact logic Dunleavy described. A player who can matter now and still be around when those future picks would actually come due. That's the hidden weight behind the quote. He's not talking about talent in a vacuum. He's talking about timelines, and it also tells you the Warriors are thinking beyond the Stephen Curry era without pretending it's here yet. They're trying to protect the present while building a bridge to whatever comes next. But here's the tension the article keeps coming back to. The Pelicans are reportedly holding on to Murphy, so even if Golden State is willing to offer multiple first-round picks, willingness alone doesn't create a deal. The other side has to believe the return is worth moving an ascending player. That's why the article says there's no indication anything is imminent. It's a reminder that linked doesn't mean close. Now, you might be thinking, if the Warriors want to stay competitive, why not pivot fast to the other name mentioned? And that's where the Markkanen contrast becomes the whole point. The article frames Markkanen as someone who could fit the profile. But it also frames the money difference as the obstacle that changes everything. More than $20 million more than Murphy is not a small gap. It turns a basketball idea into a financial puzzle. And the article says that puzzle could force Butler into the trade math. That's not a minor complication. That's a completely different kind of negotiation. Because if Butler has to be moved, the cost doesn't stop at matching contracts. The article says it would require even more assets to incentivize the Jazz to take on his $56.7 million for next season. So the other option isn't simply another player. It's another level of price, another level of risk, and another layer of difficulty. That's why Murphy stays at the top. Not just because of the player, but because the pathway to get him is cleaner. And the article adds one more reality check. Even the wild card dream scenario involving Antetokounmpo is described as unlikely to happen before next month's deadline. So when you put it all together, the article's message becomes pretty direct. Murphy is the primary target, unless something massive and unexpected changes the landscape. Which means the Warriors' deadline story is less about noise and more about leverage. How hard can they push, and how firm will New Orleans stay? Because the Warriors have basically defined the kind of return they'd need to justify spending post-Curry picks. And the article argues Murphy is the rare name who matches that standard. So as the deadline gets closer, the real drama is simple, not whether Golden State is interested, but whether interest can overcome resistance. And until the Pelicans budge, the article suggests the Warriors are stuck in the same place, locked onto the obvious target. With no clear sign the door is actually opening. Bill Simmons is floating a wild, desperate idea for the Warriors after Jimmy Butler's injury. At the very least, they should have a real conversation about Zion Williamson. Before Butler went down, the expectation was that Golden State would be one of the most aggressive buyers at this season's trade deadline, trying to add a legitimate third option next to Stephen Curry and Butler. But Butler's season-ending ACL injury has completely reshaped the Warriors' math, and now the front office can't afford to rule out anything. Curry is getting closer to the end of his career, and the Warriors know the clock is ticking. If he's still playing at a superstar level, the organization has to do whatever it can to maximize the remaining window, because opportunities like this don't last. Up until now, the main names connected to Golden State in rumors have been players like Michael Porter Jr. and Trey Murphy. But with Butler expected to miss the rest of the season, the situation has changed. The Warriors aren't just shopping for a nice upgrade anymore. They're staring at a season that could slip away unless they do something bold. That's why Simmons, on the latest episode of his podcast, brought up a target that would have sounded unrealistic a week ago. Zion Williamson of the New Orleans Pelicans. Why Simmons thinks Zion is worth discussing. To be clear, this isn't a report saying the Warriors are actively pursuing Zion. There are no concrete rumors tying Golden State to him. In fact, the Pelicans have reportedly been reluctant to move any of their core pieces, especially because they don't have a first-round pick this year. But the Pelicans are also sitting at 10-35, last in the Western Conference. And in that context, Simmons believes Golden State should at least do its homework and talk through what a deal for Zion would even look like. Here's how Simmons put it. The trade of the Michael Porter Jr. I don't think it changes the fate of them as a team that's not going to win the title. Would a Zion Williamson gamble be a gamble? If you and I were in charge of the Warriors, I think we would go out for coffee and we would discuss the pros and cons of Zion, and honestly, gamble might be the perfect word for any Zion move. The upside is obvious. Zion has shown star potential since entering the league in 2019. This season, he's averaging 22.5 points, 5.8 rebounds, and 5 assists, while shooting 58.5% from the field. At his best, he's an overwhelming force on offensive plays, someone who can dominate possessions and bend a defense. And the idea of pairing that kind of pressure with Curry's gravity is undeniably tempting. Because if Golden State is trying to replace some of what Butler was supposed to provide, another major threat who can change the shape of a game, Zion is one of the few names that truly fits that kind of impact on paper. The risk is just as real, but the concerns are impossible to ignore. Zion has played more than 65 games only once in his career. He's also had 3 seasons where he played 30 games or fewer. That history turns any trade into a high-stakes bet, no matter how exciting the upside looks. And the contract adds another layer. Zion has 3 seasons remaining on a 5-year, $197 million deal. That's not just a big commitment. It's the kind of commitment that could define the next phase of the franchise. The text makes it clear, even if Zion could be acquired at a low cost relative to the size of his contract, it would still likely require including Butler in the deal. Why the Warriors might feel forced to explore it anyway. This is where the urgency hits hardest. The Warriors don't have the luxury of simply accepting a lost season because of injury. Not with Curry still playing like a superstar and the franchise trying to squeeze everything possible out of what's left of his prime years. That's why the argument isn't the Warriors must trade for Zion. It's simpler and more realistic. They have to evaluate every available candidate and see if any move can actually maximize what remains of Curry's career. And in that discussion, the name Zion Williamson can't be dismissed outright. Not because it's safe, not because it's easy, but because after Butler's injury, Golden State may be at the point where even the risky options have to be on the table, if they're serious about not letting this season slip away. And that's what makes Simmons's idea feel so uncomfortable and so relevant at the same time. Because this isn't being framed as a smart move. It's being framed as a move you consider when the normal options don't feel like enough. That's the entire point of the Michael Porter Jr. comparison in Simmons's quote. He isn't saying Porter is a bad player. He's saying that kind of trade doesn't change the Warriors' fate. In other words, it doesn't move them from good to championship. And once Butler's season ends, that question becomes unavoidable. What can actually shift the ceiling of this team right now? That's where Zion enters the conversation. Not as a guaranteed fix, but as a swing big enough to at least imagine a different outcome. Because Zion's numbers in the text aren't the numbers of a minor piece. They're the numbers of someone who can be a focal point, 22.5 points per game on 58.5% shooting. And when you put that next to what Curry demands from defenses, the appeal is clear. It's not just another scorer. It's a completely different type of threat. That's also why the word dominant is doing real work here. The text calls him absolutely dominant in offensive actions. So the upside isn't subtle. It's loud, obvious, and easy to sell to yourself when you're staring at a season that could be derailed. But the same text also spells out why this would be the riskiest bet possible. It's the availability history. More than 65 games only once. 3 seasons with 30 games or fewer. That's not a small red flag. That's the kind of pattern that forces a front office to argue with itself in a room for hours. Because even if he's cheap relative to the contract value, the contract is still huge. 3 years left on a 5-year, $197 million deal is real commitment, and if it likely requires moving Butler to make the money work, you're not just swapping players, you're reshaping your entire plan. That's where the repercussions get bigger than one potential trade target. If the Warriors even explore something like this, it signals that the Butler injury didn't just hurt the roster, it changed the mindset. It shifts the conversation from, "We'll survive and keep building," to "We cannot waste a year." Because the text makes that point directly. The Warriors can't afford to lose a season to injury, not with Curry's clock moving forward. And that urgency is exactly why Zion's name is being brought into the room at all. Not because it's clean, not because it's safe. Because when your original plan collapses, the options you once rejected start to look like possibilities, even the uncomfortable ones. Meanwhile, the Pelicans' position adds another layer of tension. The text notes they've been reluctant to move core pieces, partly because they don't have a first-round pick this year. But it also notes they're 10-35 and last in the West, so you can feel the friction between "we don't want to move our guys" and "where is this season going?" And that's why Simmons' suggestion is not a rumor. It's a thought experiment with stakes. A conversation about what a franchise is willing to risk when the safe path doesn't lead where it wants. For Golden State, the underlying message is simple. The Warriors have to look at every candidate and decide who can truly maximize what's left of Curry's superstar window. If the answer is no one, then the season becomes about survival. If the answer is maybe, then a gamble like Zion becomes part of the debate. Not because anyone loves the risk, but because the team might decide the bigger risk is doing nothing and watching another year disappear. The Golden State Warriors have made their stance on Jimmy Butler crystal clear after his injury. And honestly, it's exactly what most people should have expected. Up until Monday, there was a lot of confidence that Golden State could move Butler before the trade deadline if they wanted to reshape the roster. Then Butler suffered a torn ACL and suddenly the speculation exploded. Could the front office flip his contract for a package of players to keep the title chase alive? But on Wednesday, NBA reporter Mark Stein essentially confirmed what Mike Dunleavy had already indicated on Tuesday. Stein wrote, "In addition, it is considered unlikely that the Warriors would try to use Butler's contract in a trade the way they did with DeAnthony Melton's last season in a deal almost immediately after Melton's ACL tear for a series of reasons. And those reasons, laid out in the report, paint a pretty clear picture of why Butler isn't going anywhere. First, the money is enormous. Butler is making $54.1 million this season and is set to make $56.8 million next season. That kind of contract is hard to move under any circumstances, and it becomes even more complicated after a major injury. Second, there's the simple basketball reality. Butler makes the Warriors better. Stein pointed to the team's record in games Butler has played since the trade last year, 46-22. That's not the profile of someone you rush to dump. And then there's something you can't measure in numbers. Stein noted Butler's long-standing relationship with Dunleavy. That matters, because it adds a layer of trust and commitment that often influences how teams handle situations like this. Before Monday, Golden State was actively looking for ways to strengthen the trio of Butler, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green. Jonathan Kuminga even requested a trade as soon as he became eligible, less than a week ago on January 15th. But now that Butler is out, the entire situation shifts. There's suddenly a real chance Kuminga stays in the Bay Area simply because the Warriors' priorities have been forced to change. it's unlikely the Warriors trade Jimmy Butler. Even if Golden State wanted to trade Butler, the report suggests it would be close to impossible, unless the Warriors were willing to attach draft picks just to get another team to take on the contract. A team like Washington is mentioned as an example of the type of situation that might require that kind of incentive. And it doesn't sound like Golden State wants to go down that road. Instead, the plan is straightforward. The Warriors expect Butler to return next season and give them the same kind of lift he provided when he arrived in San Francisco last year. But time is the part that makes this whole thing feel so tense. Butler will be 37 when he plays again. The Warriors' championship window was already short, and losing him for a long stretch makes that window even smaller. Golden State is running out of options to chase another title with Curry, who will turn 38 in March. And yes, there's an argument for doing the opposite, trading Butler now rather than waiting, because there's no guarantee he returns at the same level after such a significant injury. But the key point in the report is this. Based on what Dunleavy has said and what Stein reported, don't expect that to happen. If the front office changes its mind and makes Butler available, fans won't have to wait long to find out. The trade deadline is only 2 weeks away, but right now all signs point in one direction. The Warriors aren't looking to move Jimmy Butler. And that stance, don't expect it, carries real consequences because it quietly answers the biggest question Golden State is facing right now. Are the Warriors trying to reset, or are they still trying to ride this era as far as it can go? Keeping Butler even after a torn ACL tells you the organization isn't rushing into a panic move. It suggests they still believe his impact is worth waiting for, and that they're not interested in treating his contract like a temporary asset the way they did with DeAnthony Melton after Melton's own ACL tear last season. That comparison matters because it shows the front office has already been in a similar situation, and this time, the decision is different. Part of it is the contract size. Butler's $54.1 million this season and $56.8 million next season isn't just a big number. It's a massive barrier to any realistic deal. And if the only way to move it would be attaching draft picks just to get someone to take it, the report makes it clear that's not the direction Golden State wants. Because at that point, you're not trading to get better. You're trading to get out. And that's where the 46-22 detail becomes even more important. The report points to Golden State's record in games Butler has played since last year's trade. That number isn't just a stat. It's an argument. It's the front office saying, when he's out there, we're a better team, so why would we rush to dump him now? Then you add the human factor Stein referenced, Butler's long-standing relationship with Mike Dunleavy. In a league where so many moves feel purely transactional, that kind of relationship can influence patience. It can also influence the benefit of the doubt a player gets when things go wrong. But the hardest part of this entire story is the timeline. Butler will be 37 when he plays again. Curry turns 38 in March. This isn't a young core with endless chances ahead. The championship window was already tight, and the report says it's shrinking even more because Butler will be out for a long time. That reality is why some people will argue the Warriors should trade Butler now, before they risk finding out he can't return to the same level. The report even acknowledges that logic. There's no guarantee he comes back as the same player after a major injury. But Golden State appears to be choosing the other side of that bet. They're choosing patience, and that choice naturally changes what happens around the rest of the roster, especially Jonathan Kuminga. Before Butler's injury, the Warriors were looking for ways to strengthen the trio of Butler, Curry, and Draymond Green. Kuminga requested a trade as soon as he became eligible on January 15th, and he immediately became the obvious name in deadline discussions. Now, though, the report says there's a real chance Kuminga stays in the Bay Area after Butler's injury. Not because the earlier tension disappears, but because the priorities shift. When a team loses a star for the season, the clean, aggressive deadline plan often turns messy. The types of deals you can make and the reasons you'd make them change overnight. And all of this circles back to the calendar. With only 2 weeks left until the deadline, the Warriors don't have the luxury of letting this drag out quietly. If they were going to flip Butler, that decision would have to happen fast. But the report's message is the opposite. Based on what Dunleavy said and what Stein reported, fans shouldn't expect the Warriors to suddenly put Butler on the market. So if Butler isn't getting moved, the pressure shifts elsewhere. It shifts to what Golden State can do around the edges. It shifts to how they manage the present season without him. And it shifts to whether they can keep enough competitive momentum to make next season's Butler returns plan meaningful. Because waiting only makes sense if the team can still build toward something. That's the ripple effect of this stance. It doesn't just keep Butler in place. It locks the Warriors into a narrower set of options at the exact moment their margin for error is shrinking. And unless something changes quickly, this becomes the new reality in Golden State. They're not cashing out. They're not escaping the contract. They're not attaching picks just to move money. They're betting on a return. And with the deadline 2 weeks away, the league won't have to wait long to see whether that bet comes with another move, or whether the Warriors simply ride this out, accept the short-term pain, and put everything on what Butler can bring back next season.